this is not the only virus in the world. Why is this not occurring with the other viruses that are circulating, the RSV, the influenzas, and so on? Why is this concern primarily with that COVID-19 coronavirus? I thought that was a good question. Any thoughts on it?
Well, it's not a thought. It is not limited. If you want, Philip, it has nothing to do with coronavirus. It has to do, for God's sake, with us, doing mass vaccination during a pandemic and driving immune escape. Remember, all these evolutions that we are seeing right now at the population level have started when we, implemented the mass vaccination program, where we have seen, for example, the Omicrons, where we have seen the early variants, where we have seen the later variants that were directed against other epitopes. Remember, the antibody responses, the immune responses induced by Omicron did not boost the vaccine responses. And these antibody responses were no longer protective, even not against the new Omicron variants. So that is where the shift in the focusing of the immune response took place. And this is how the virus continued to evolve till we had these higher infectious strains like the XBBs and the BQs, etc. And where in fact the virulence inhibiting effect all of a sudden appeared. This is a phenomenon that we have not seen. Would you do the same thing with influenza, you would get exactly to the same data. This does not apply to all viruses. It would apply to all pandemics of acute self-limiting viral infections, where we would do this type of vaccination, mass vaccination, whole populations during a pandemic. So corona is just one of the examples of an acute self-limiting infection.
Yes, Rob. Yes, go ahead, Rob. I was just going to bring you in. Yeah.
If I may, a couple of things that you just said, Geert, might be confusing to some of the viewers. On the one hand, I think you were saying that eventually the non-neutralizing antibodies that have a virulence inhibiting effect will eventually wane and decrease.
Yes.
Particularly, I imagine, if fewer and fewer people get vaccinated and boosted. And so you said that on that basis alone, those people that have had those protective antibodies will lose that protection or will have much less protection from that. And on that basis alone, they will be vulnerable to more severe infection. But on the other hand, you also said, and have said in the past, that the virus itself will overcome those virulence inhibiting antibodies by developing a glycosylation change that will allow them to overcome or bypass that particular virulence inhibiting effect of those antibodies. So those are two different mechanisms for why people will become more severely ill. But one other point.
These are not two different mechanisms, but go ahead.
Okay, go ahead.
Well, these are not two different mechanisms, because when you diminish the level and the concentration of these antibodies, you will make it easier for an appropriate mutant to get selected and overcome this increased immune selection pressure. Remember, this is the same thing that we have at the beginning of the pandemic. We started vaccinating people. The levels of the antibodies and the maturity of these antibodies was not sufficient to really stop the transmission. And because of these suboptimal levels, we were putting immune selection pressure on the virus. Here, when this titers decline of the virus inhibiting antibodies, we will put suboptimal pressure on the virus. And as I was saying, the virus can no longer overcome this with enhanced infectivity. That potential is kind of like exhausted. So it is now most likely, according to my humble opinion, going to make changes in the glycosylation to do that job. And unfortunately, everybody continues doing the profiling of the peptides and the amino acid mutations, etc. What I would like to see is of the variants that are now circulating, the evolution of the glycosylation profile, the O glycosylation sites, to see whether and how strongly this is evolving.
Well, again, I think the confusion then is that I think a lot of people have the notion that as fewer and fewer people are getting boosted or vaccinated, and as those virulence inhibiting antibodies decline, they have the notion that that will put less immune pressure on the virus, because they understand that if you have a lot of immune pressure on the virus, it will then learn to escape that pressure. And so they're thinking that if those virulence inhibiting antibodies decline, they're thinking that that puts less immune pressure on the virus and thereby makes it less likely that the virus will become more virulent. So
the best opportunities and chances for the virus, you have to see this like this. If the titers of the non-neutralizing antibodies are very high, I mean, there is no way for the virus to move into overcoming this, right? It's under control. The virulence is under control. But the point that people might make, and that is an important point, is, if that is the case, we should get boosted again. We should get revaccinated, because that is going to increase again the titers, and we will again be able to control the virulence of the virus. And there I'm saying, unfortunately, the boosters, the additional vaccination, even with updated Omicron variants, and even the recurrent infections with the circulating virus, do no longer boost the vaccine-induced antibodies, and that is the problem. So, unfortunately, they are going to decline, and I would love to see surveys of the titer of these antibodies done in, a representative amount of people in a certain highly vaccinated population.
So it's the suboptimal level of those virulence inhibiting antibodies that puts immune pressure on the virus.
Exactly.
Okay.